Hey YouTube, it's me, the student witch. Welcome back to my channel. I'm sitting here drinking some vanilla rooibos tea with some honey. It's after 5 p.m. and there's still daylight. And I'm here to do a very quick review of probably one of the most inspiring and beautiful books I've read in a very long time. I'm here to talk about, and I have my notes here, The Forest Unseen, A Year's Watch in Nature. It was published in 2012 and the author is David George Haskell. I've talked about me reading this book in a couple of recent videos. And I just finished it a couple days ago, and while it's fresh on my mind, I figured I should talk about it. Like I said, this is one of the most beautiful and inspiring books that I've read in quite some time. And that kind of surprises me because it was written by a biologist. This is not a work of fiction. This is an incredible example of science writing. So, like I've mentioned before in some previous videos, this book was written by a biology professor at my alma mater. I got my undergraduate degree at Sewanee, the University of the South, which is a small liberal arts college in rural Tennessee. Sewanee is about 45 minutes north of Chattanooga if you're on I-24 west going towards Nashville from Chattanooga. If you're familiar with that, that means you've driven right past it. It's exit number 134 if I'm not mistaken. I had an excellent college experience there, and part of that experience was lots of hiking because the university owns the domain, what we call the domain, and the domain is basically 13,000 acres of forest surrounding the university, and that includes an old growth forest called Shake Rag Hollow, and the name Shake Rag comes from back in Prohibition times because people used to make moonshine and stuff down there, and they would tie a rag to a tree to mark when the moonshine was ready to be picked up and stuff like that. So my friend and I, my junior and senior year of college, we used to hike that portion of the forest because there's what we call the perimeter trail, and it takes all day to hike it. It's like 22 miles long. And a section of the perimeter trail goes through Shake Rag Forest. And Dr. Haskell, the author of this book, he was a legendary biology professor. I mean, he's still there. He's still very much alive and teaching there. But I've always heard good things about his classes. I never took one of his classes because to take care of my science requirement, my science credit, I took psychology. I did not take any of the hard sciences because my brain is not made for that. So I never got a chance to take a class with him, but I knew people who did, and they had nothing but good things to say about him because of his approach to science, his approach to biology and the natural world. It's very hands-on, it's very experiential, and in a few minutes read a portion of the second to last chapter in the book to show how his approach to science, science isn't just, it's not a mechanistic view of nature. He doesn't have that mechanistic, quantifying view of nature. He revels in and respects the complexity that is life on this planet and how awe-inspiring it is. It's very much like it's almost as if he's a pantheist. It feels like a pantheist wrote this book. He doesn't explicitly talk about his spiritual views or anything in the book, but it feels like a pantheist wrote it. So Shakerag Hollow, this is the portion of the old-growth forest on campus where he went to make his observations to write this book. And The Forest Unseen, this book, it was, I believe, nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. It did not win, but it was still nominated. And he starts off in the prologue with the concepts and the image of the mandala. And here's a quote from the prologue. "The mandala is a recreation of the path of life, the cosmos, and the enlightenment of Buddha. The whole universe is seen through this small circle of sand." And so right off the bat we have as above, so below kind of thing. We have the idea of being able to see and understand the cosmos, the universe, within the infinitesimally small, within the micro. So being able to see and understand the macro by observing and deepening your connection with the micro kind of thing. So throughout the book he talks about his mandala and his observations made of the mandala. And basically what he did is he went into this portion of the old growth forest, he found a good rock to sit at, and he picked a circular portion of the forest that's about with a meter in diameter, and that was his mandala. And he went there periodically to make observations, and then he wrote this amazing book about his observations about the life in this forest, and life, spanning from animals the size of deer to the microscopic organisms in the deer's gut and the microscopic organisms in the soil, and the fungus or the fungi. It's so complex, and his writing is so accessible. Like I said earlier, I'm not a sciencey person. I suffered through chemistry class in high school. I made a point to take psychology for my science credit in college. I am not a science-brained person. But the way he writes, it's like storytelling. Like he's telling the story of life in this tiny portion of forest, and that story brings enlightenment. It illuminates greater mysteries about the interconnectedness of life, about the struggle for survival, about how different plant species and animal species both cooperate with each other but also compete against each other. It's incredible. There are numerous chapters, but each chapter is very short. Some are only 3 to 5 pages. I would say the largest chapter would be no more than 10 pages, because each chapter is him detailing his observations for that day. And he goes to the mandala. He starts off in January, goes through an entire calendar year, all 4 seasons, witnessing life, adapting to those seasons in the mandala. So he starts off in January, ends in December of that calendar year. And he ties it always to the bigger picture. Like, there's a chapter on vultures. And he's talking about turkey vultures. And I don't know if you've ever seen a turkey vulture, but at least, I grew up seeing turkey vultures all the time, eating the dead carcasses on the side of the road. Well, he ties that into the importance of vultures in the ecosystem, but also the importance of vultures all around the world in keeping or preventing the spread of diseases caused by rotting carcasses. And he talks about how in India there's a specific pesticide or something that was used that caused the vulture population in certain parts of India to plummet. And when the vulture population started to plummet, diseases started spreading to the human populations. So I really love how he kind of busts through that human versus nature barrier, this idea that we're somehow separate from nature, that we are not a part of nature. And he shows, like, look, y'all, like, we're part of the food chain. We are interconnected. We are dependent on these animals, and we are dependent on these ecosystems. So the other day when I was talking to my husband about this book, and I'm definitely going to buy him a copy for his birthday, I think, coming up, he said, oh, so it's like an ethnographic approach to science. And that's really interesting because he's in the field of education, and there's basically two ways to collect data for research. There's, quantifiable data, where you're working with statistics in large numbers of participants or large groups of data, and then there's more of observational data. There's the type of data where you're just interviewing a small number of participants, and from those interviews you extract your insights, and that's more of a ethnographic approach to things. And that type of approach to science and nature writing is very interesting because it pushes against this very mechanistic approach to science, this very, this approach to science that just reduces the complexity of life to just numbers, that reduces the complexity of animals' bodies to just machines and describes their bodies like machines, which that approach is very helpful for understanding how the machine works, but it's also very limiting. And the danger of that, of reducing nature to numbers and machines, is that those numbers and machines can then, be used to turn a profit. It can then become exploited or exploitable. I'll end this review on this, reading a portion, a few pages of one of the last chapters. The chapter's titled Treetops. And he is observing these squirrels just lounging in the treetops, lounging in the sun and playing with each other, enjoying each other. And he uses that as a platform to critique that mechanistic view of science. So here we go. Wild animals enjoying one another and taking pleasure in their world is so immediate and so real, yet this reality is utterly absent from textbooks and academic papers about animals and ecology. There is a truth revealed here, absurd in its simplicity. This insight is not that science is wrong or bad. On the contrary, science, done well, deepens our intimacy with the world. But there is a danger in exclusively scientific way of thinking. The forest is turned into a diagram. Animals become mere mechanisms. Nature's workings become clever graphs. Today's conviviality of squirrels seems a refutation of such narrowness. Nature is not a machine. These animals feel. They are alive. They are our cousins, with the shared experience that kinship implies, and they appear to enjoy the sun, a phenomenon that occurs nowhere in the curriculum of modern biology. Sadly, modern science is too often unable or unwilling to visualize or feel what others experience. Certainly, science's objective gambit can be helpful in understanding parts of nature and in freeing us from some cultural preconceptions. Our modern scientific taste for dispassion when analyzing animal behavior, formed in reaction to the Victorian naturalists and their predecessors who saw all nature as an allegory confirming their cultural values. But a gambit is just an opening move, not a coherent vision of a whole game. Science's objectivity sheds some assumptions, but takes on others. That, dressed up in academic rigor, can produce hubris and callousness about the world. The danger The danger comes when we confuse the limited scope of our scientific methods with the true scope of the world. It may be useful or expedient to describe nature as a flow diagram or an animal as a machine, but such utility should not be confused with a confirmation that our limiting assumptions reflect the shape of the world. Not coincidentally, the hubris of narrowly applied science serves the needs of industrial economy. Machines are bought, sold, and discarded. Joyful cousins are not. 2 days ago, on Christmas Eve, the U.S. Forest Service opened to commercial logging 300,000 acres of an old-growth forest in the Tungus National Forest, more than 1 billion square meter mandalas. Arrows moved on a flow chart, graphs of quantified timber shifted. Modern forest science integrated seamlessly with global commodity markets. Language and values needed no translation. Scientific models and metaphors of machines are helpful but limited. They cannot tell us all that we need to know. What lies beyond the theories we impose on nature? This year I have tried to put down scientific tools and to listen. To come to nature without a hypothesis, without a scheme for data extraction, without a lesson plan to convey answers to students, without machines and probes. I have glimpsed how rich science is, but simultaneously how limited in scope and spirit it is. It is unfortunate that the practice of listening generally has no place in the formal training of scientists. In this absence, science needlessly fails. We are poorer for this, and possibly more hurtful. What Christmas Eve gifts might a listening culture give its forests? What was the insight that brushed past me as the squirrels basked? It was not to turn away from science. My experience of animals is richer for knowing their stories, and science is a powerful way to deepen this understanding. Rather, I realized that all stories are partly wrapped in fiction. The fiction of simplifying assumptions, of cultural myopia, and of the storyteller's pride. I learned to revel in the stories, but not to mistake them for the bright, ineffable nature of the world. It's beautiful. So I highly, highly, highly recommend this book. It is available on Kindle. You can also buy the physical book through Amazon. And Professor Haskell has a new book coming out in April called The Songs of Trees, which I am definitely buying as soon as it comes out. So I hope you've enjoyed this review. Please, if you do read this book, let me know how it goes. Let me know of your impressions of it. And until next time, many blessings. Bye.